Good afternoon. At the tone, Pacific Daylight Time will be 5, 4, and 30 seconds.
What? Oh my God, we're having an earthquake. Wait a minute. Hold on. Can you feel that?
I sure can.
Okay, this is interesting. There go the lights. Oh.
We are here with Gary Watson at the Scotts Valley Library. It is the 2nd of October 2019, and we're here to talk about the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for asking me.
Can you start by telling me how long you've been in Santa Cruz?
I've lived in Santa Cruz since I first moved to the mountains in 1979, then lived in town for 7 years, and I've been up in my present home for the past 32 years.
Great.
So,
born and raised in California?
Born in the Bay Area, born in Oakland, grew up in San Jose, Sunnyvale, mostly Sunnyvale.
So you've experienced more than one earthquake, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah, I remember my first earthquake in 1957. I was in the bathroom and the wastebasket started rattling, and I called out to Mom and Dad. Nobody's in the house.
Oh.
And I ran outside, and all the neighbors had gathered to talk about it.
Wow.
So that was my first recollection.
So can you tell me about your experience during the 89 earthquake?
Well, I just fixed dinner, and I live 4 miles from the epicenter, so it's kind of a locator. Had a big pot of chicken broth because I just poached a chicken, and I made some chicken enchiladas, and was just about to sit down and enjoy those. And I watched the baseball game, of course. And I heard a rumbling. It sounded like a train in the distance. And I thought, very odd sound. Then I see a plume of dust cascade down in the driveway. That's very odd. Then also the whole place shook. And the sofa came up to meet me. And the bookcase that I just walked past came crashing down. My dogs disappeared. So I grabbed a radio to see what had happened. Of course, the electricity went off. My computer hit the floor, TV hit the floor, and it was just chaos inside. So I decided I better step outside and see what's going on. Grabbed the transistor radio, and as I'm walking up the driveway to the road, I'm hearing propane tanks whistling and going off, the neighbors. And I'm tuning the radio, and I can't find any radio stations. I finally find a weak station. It was KROW in Reno. And they were reporting that they had just got word of an earthquake, a large earthquake in San Bernardino. And I'm thinking, my God, if it was that strong here, the rest of the state is gone. You know, the Great Quake of 89 or 69, you know, whatever the book was coming true. But walked up the road, and there was no traffic whatsoever, so I knew that the road was closed off. SoCal San Jose Road tends to get closed by trees falling and slides and things, but I had no idea how bad it was. About 10 minutes later, and of course there's several aftershocks going on as I'm walking up the road, I come across some of my neighbors on the road above me, on the ridge above, on Turnpike Road, from Turnpike Road. And they told me of a house that had collapsed almost directly across the road from me on the ridge. And they were looking to see if there was any, anybody hurt or anything. I walked to my next door neighbors. Nobody was home, but I shut their propane off. I shut their water off, and I checked to make sure that there was no water, running out of the front door. And we encountered a few more people on the road who, one woman had a cell phone, and it was real early for cell phones. It was one of the big Motorola bricks. And she was panicked because she couldn't get through. She couldn't get a signal to get through, which is understandable. But she had said she'd come up from down below and said that the road was closed because of a slide, and a house had been carried off and across the road down below us. And that I found out later it was the pet motel, quarter mile from my house, Jody's Pet Motel. And the people had come from up the road, said that there was another slide above us, and the road was completely closed off, so there's no way getting in and out. After an hour of not being able to do too much except for feel the road shake, and there was a fire on the hilltop behind our house, and that was on Hester Creek Road somewhere.
Was it a house fire? I'm
assuming it was a house fire, but I never got final word as to what it was. I just assumed the size of the smoke plume that that's what it would be. So I went in and picked up the phone off the floor and tried to call my landlady who I was buying the house from. She lived up on Summit Road. And no dial tone. So I managed to sit and eat my dinner. And after the sun had gone down, so maybe 8 o'clock, 3 hours gone by, all my dogs were accounted for, 2 in the front yard, or 1 in the front yard, because I only had 3 dogs at the time. One of them was in the bedroom. My nightstand had apparently lifted up, turned upside down, and dropped again. Because the nightstand was upside down in the corner, and my poor beagle was sitting inside the nightstand legs, just trembling. I'd been sent him by a friend of mine in Tennessee a week earlier. So this is the dog's first exposure to California, and he wasn't thrilled. And I had an Australian Shepherd, and he was fine, and my other beagle was fine. About 8:30, I was startled because the phone rang, and I couldn't believe it. So I picked it up. It was my landlady up on Summit Road, and she was so shook up. And she had a gap in her driveway that was good 2 feet across, and you couldn't see the bottom of it. And she had horrible damage inside her house, and she wanted to know if I could get up there as soon as possible. And I said, well, it's going to be a while because there's no traffic on the roads. So it means roads closed. Somewhere around 9 o'clock, a Greyhound bus came down the road, and he had pulled off of Highway 17 because of the slide at the summit on 17, and he was on his way to Santa Cruz and got stuck behind the slide on my road trying to get to town. And when they got the upper part of the road open, he was the first one through. He had all his passengers. And so I knew the road was open at that point, coming down, because I knew he didn't go up. Right. I drove up to Carroll's, and the road was there were buckles in the road a good 1.5 feet high. And it was, didn't dare drive more than 5 miles an hour because I didn't know if I was going to fall into a crevasse or what. The road had just been paved about 4 months earlier in the summer. So it was too bad because he did a real nice job, and that was all buckled and everything. Got up to Carroll's, and she had a motorhome that we spent the night in because we were afraid to go in the house. Her cat was somewhere in there. We didn't realize her next door neighbor had been in the kitchen. She had a litter of puppies, and she was in the kennel room, and the freezer had rolled across the floor and pinned her to the wall. And we didn't know that until a couple days later, when her daughter came, found her, crying, and pulled the freezer aside, got her out. So we felt really bad that we didn't go up and check, because we thought, there was no sign of activity. She would have come down. So we figured she wasn't home. And, kind of a fun thing. had met a girl a couple weeks before, and our first date was supposed to be on October 2nd, or on October 18th, on Wednesday, day after the quake. Well, that Wednesday. And I stood her up. And after a couple weeks, I finally got a hold of her, and I said, sorry about not calling you back, but I had my hands full. She says, yeah, I understand. We had some water splashed out of the swimming pool. She was living in Carmel at the time. So she and I have been now married for 30 years, coming next June. So in spite of standing her up, she forgave me. And
That's cute.
yeah. I really can't think of much more. I did call my store. I worked in a grocery store and talked to the assistant manager. He says, Gary, we need you. Can you get in here? And I said, no. It was my night off. And I work graveyard shift, and this was my night off. And there was, even if the road was open, which it wasn't, I wouldn't have gone. He said, oh, there's stuff all over the floor, and we got a big cleanup to do. I said, enjoy. Anybody hurt? No. Good. Okay. That's all I was checking. So, and then I spent the next 3 weeks living with my brother and sister-in-law in Santa Clara until I could psychologically get up the nerve to go back to survey the damage. And what I'd walked into was the chicken broth all over the floor from my chicken, poached chicken. Apparently I have an old Wedgwood propane stove, and the broiler is underneath the oven. And apparently the door opened, the pot came down, hit the door, broke the door, and then landed on the floor. Splashed everywhere. And the refrigerator opened, all the contents dumped out, and closed again. So I had a nice empty refrigerator to come home to, and nicely chilled, because the electricity would finally come back on after a week or so. I have a video somewhere that I took the day after the quake, and I set my my video camera up in the car and drove down to the house. And by then KGO had come back on the air, and I was listening to KGO. And they were narrating the fires and what happened in San Francisco as I'm driving down our road, and you can see everything bump every time I hit one of the bumps. And it was about 15 minutes to go the 4 miles from the summit down to my house. But somewhere I've got this video that, documented that journey.
Yeah.
And my friend Carol that I spent the night with, she had a beagle kennel, and she moved all her dogs to a kennel in Santa Clara next to the 7-Up bottling plant until repairs were made, because the fences came down and stuff like that in her kennel, and the holes were filled. She had to wait till the holes were filled so that no dogs fell down into the crevasses, and it was a very interesting time.
So you said that you didn't immediately know how significant the earthquake had been.
Right.
At what point did you learn, or did it dawn on you that it was a pretty massive earthquake?
Well, when KGO finally came back on the air, I was hearing reports from the Marina District and the reports of the Bay Bridge. But it wasn't until I moved in with my sister-in-law and brother down in Santa Clara and saw TV for the first time, hit just to the extent. And I still didn't know how bad Santa Cruz had been hit, because they hadn't gone that direction. It went the other way. And of course, as far as I know, I didn't lose anybody in the quake that I knew. So I felt quite blessed for all my friends that were in Santa Cruz. There was something in the aftermath I can't think of. Santa Cruz. Oh, I felt very privileged because I had a sticker on my windshield that said Santa Cruz Mountain resident, and it was issued by one of the supervisors. And the Highway Patrol allowed me to drive to and from work every day up Highway 17 because the slide was just past Summit Road. And I was able to ride share with people that were standing at the freeway on-ramp. Can you give me a ride to Soquel San Jose Road? Yes.
Wow.
And they were able to, find, there weren't too many people beyond me because it was only Santa Clara County had access, but I lived in a Santa Cruz portion of Los Gatos. So the Highway Patrol saw Los Gatos, and they said, you're okay. Anybody with a Santa Cruz address was stopped, and they were told to find alternative means of getting there.
Wow.
Which I assume meant driving down to Watsonville and up over Hecker Pass, if that was possible. I'm not sure. But I know a lot of people weren't able to get to work at all. But I was very fortunate in that I didn't actually lose any time at work, and I was able to get to and from. Maybe a little slow, but I was able to get to and from.
Right.
Especially after I moved in with my brother until I was able to move home. But the road on Highway 17 wasn't open for months. It's a very eerie feeling to drive Highway 17 and no traffic whatsoever. It was, felt special.
Silver lining.
Yeah.
Did the earthquake impact your life, and if so, how?
Well, I'm not knowing what it was, I pieced together in the years later that I had PTSD. At work, people were joking about, things that had happened, like stuff falling off the shelves and a picture falling, and joking about the earthquake, and it hit me really hard, and I broke down several times, for no apparent reason. I would think, and I started, yelling at them up and down, and they could, everybody stay away from Gary. He's, kind of flipped out, and I didn't know what PTSD was at that time, and I've learned since that I haven't really felt many earthquakes since then, but I went through the floods in Soquel in 82, and I saw Soquel under 10 feet of water, and I live on a steep incline on Soquel San Jose Road, and there was a foot of water rushing down a steep road, which is impossible. I couldn't conceive of a flood on a hill, but it was definitely flooding. I have a metal roof at my house, and every now and then when the rain hits real hard, I'll get PTSD from that too. But yeah, I still live in the mountains, in the same house.
Right. So, and you don't have to answer this if you're not comfortable answering it. Did you ever seek counseling or anything like that for your PTSD?
No, I think I went another direction. I got my ham radio license, and I belong to the Amateur Radio Emergency Service. I'm a volunteer for the county now at the Emergency Operations Center. And having been through it, I want to do everything I can to provide communications, knowing what it's like to not have any. Mm-hmm. So I kind of diverted the anxiety into a positive direction, I think. But no, I never sought professional counseling.
Since you mentioned ham radio and communications in disasters, would you mind talking briefly about that?
Well, we train how to handle emergency situations. We set up networks, and if we have a mock exercise, something's happened, and we get on on a network, and we establish communications, knowing who's where and what. We can send radio operators out to check. In the winters, we check river levels in Felton. And we're always preparing for earthquake drills. When an earthquake or something major happens, cell phones will get jammed, and you're not going to get a voice message through. Might get a text message through eventually, because it'll sit there and wait until a line is open and it can zip through and get to its destination. So that's about all you can hope for. I got a memo from one of the emergency networks that we send email by radio through, and I got an email this morning saying that the cell phone companies have put out a notice that in the event of a fire and the loss of a tower, if they can't get to the cell tower, they're not going to be there won't be cell service. They have battery backups, but that only lasts for about 24 hours. They need to get a generator to the cell phone site. If they can't get to it, that entire area served by the cell phone is out. Ham radio, we have all of our repeaters locally on battery power, and we can talk to stations from San Francisco to Walnut Creek, all the way to San Benito on a handheld radio. So we always have communication available to us, and we, as ham radio operators, volunteer to provide our service to people who need it.
Was ham radio active during the quake?
There are some links, and I believe Rosemary may have sent you the links, of ham radio operators responding during the quake. I didn't have my license then, but you can hear how they started giving reports of damage and worked closely with police and fire. Their radios don't cover, they did at the time, but they don't now because they've narrow banded the radios. And there's a lot of areas in the county that they can't get radio reception. And one of my friends in Aptos, there was a fire across the street from her house. Her husband was home and she was in town. And when she got home, the sheriff's department had prevented her from going up there because they were fighting the fire. So she called her husband, and the deputy saw her on the radio and realized that she was talking to somebody right there. He says, "Well, I can't talk to anybody up there, so can you provide communication for us?" And that's another thing that we do, because they can't get up some of these canyons.
Interesting. Do you, other than being instrumental in communications during an emergency, do you take any precautions against natural disasters?
Well, I have my Go kit that has my personal gear for 2 to 3 days. We still have to work on a better Go kit for the house. We have 3 standard poodles, a parrot, and a cockatiel. And we have to find some way of quickly getting them out and safe. The dogs won't be much of a problem. I'm worried about getting the parrot out and the cockatiel, but we have water stored for an emergency. We've got food in the cupboard in case. We're used to being without power for days at a time up in the mountains. So we try to be prepared. As far as evacuating, we haven't fully prepared for that, but it's something that everybody should do, of course.
Sure. Do you think the earthquake impacted the Santa Cruz community as a whole?
Well, yeah, I think it brought us together in an amazing way. There's now an amateur radio club and ARES, Amateur Radio Emergency Service group, up at Loma Prieta that was founded immediately after the earthquake. They've put up 2 repeaters up there, so they have contact with everybody up on the top of the mountain. And that was an outcome of earthquake. The county helped with one of the repeaters, and they bought the other repeaters. So, and I don't know. I think there was for a long period, you always had a common bond. You know, where were you? What were you doing? That conversation was held, well, for several years. You meet somebody new, oh, well, where were you? There was always a conversation starter. So I think in that respect, it brought the community together. Seeing, you know, some of the old buildings come down in downtown and new ones going up, and the traces of the earthquake are all but gone now. All the empty lots are gone now, and walk down the street and, you know, flashback on what was, but how nice it is now. So, you know, yeah, there's always growth out of turmoil.
Sure. What's it like to reflect on your experience 30 years later?
It's not something I do often, except for when I'm being interviewed. I was interviewed by Channel 8 News a couple months ago, and you're reaching out to me for this. It gives me a perspective of why I'm, you know, doing the volunteer work. It reminds me that, you know, it's not just fun and games, which it is fun and games, but it has an important purpose behind it. So,
is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't covered?
Can't think of anything that's not firsthand, so I think that's about it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming here and
Sure.
sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.